Welcome to the Times of Industry show with wealthresearchgroup.com. Today, I welcome to the show a new guest. His name is Brandon Smith, and he writes a financial and political blog called alt-market.com. Very sharp guy, and we're going to get his take on what's going on with North Korea, as well as the domestic political issues in the U.S. Brandon, how are you doing?
Hi, Lior. Thanks for having me on the show.
Brandon, look, it's a pleasure to have you on. I've been following your work for a while. Very sharp guy. I was in the States for a month in August, and it seems to me, speaking with many people on the streets and just people that I know in my context, that the fabric of society, or in other words, the shared values that Americans used to hold so dear, like the freedom of speech or the right to bear arms or the Constitution, they're evaporating fast. I mean, for a country which isn't built on ethnicity, they're built on shared values. Are they in danger of social unrest as things unwind in the U.S.? Do you see any signs of that? Is this a nation in danger of breaking up into individual states down the road? I mean, what's going on? Analyze the American situation right now.
Well, as far as civil unrest, I would absolutely say yes. Much worse than what we've seen so far. I think that things will continue to escalate. I would say that this really started. The current unrest started with sort of an unseen shift in, I guess, people on the left end of the political spectrum. There was sort of a hidden shift with those people towards very extreme kind of cultural Marxism. And with that shift, there came a lot of pressure on conservatives and regular people who are maybe middle of the road. There came a lot of pressure as far as controlling speech, self-censorship. There's a mob mentality with the extreme left that has been used to bully people for many years, and it's only escalated to the point where now there's been a massive backlash against the leftists or the cultural Marxists. And what we're seeing now is, I would equate it actually to perhaps 1920s, early 1920s Italy, during the onset of the rise of fascism, where you had communist mobs, communist groups going around and harassing people, bullying people, destroying property. And this caused a major backlash with conservatives or with just regular people in the opposite direction. And they started supporting projects such as fascism. And we're kind of at that nexus point in the U.S. right now. And that's really my major concern right now, is that especially conservatives, that we will become so enraged by the audacity of the leftists that we will decide to take a morally relative position and become more totalitarian in response. There's a lot of people out there that would like to rationalize that kind of response as being, well, the leftists are worse than we are, so it's a justified response, or it's for the greater good of the greater number. But I do see both sides of our political dynamic being pushed to the far extremes of either end of the spectrum.
Now, Brandon, I want to ask you, we'll get to cryptocurrencies in a sec here, but before we do, how is your big picture analysis on the North Korean situation escalating?
Well, my position is that there is going to be a second Korean War, a second war with North Korea. I have not seen this kind of war rhetoric since the second invasion of Iraq. There's a unique level of irrationality to it all that I haven't seen for a long time. It only seems to be increasing exponentially. North Korea's missile tests have been going on for many years and years. There's always been a measure of concern, but talk of invasion and regime change has always been, that's always been sort of the last resort, kind of a crazy idea, it'll never happen idea. Now it seems like it's one of the first things on the list as far as responses. Also, something I've never seen before, China has changed its stance in terms of North Korea recently. They've said not more than a few weeks ago, they've stated that if North Korea attacks first, then they will remain neutral during any kind of invasion or attempt at regime change. I have never seen a statement like that from China before. It appears to me that they've left the door open for invasion or attack by the U.S. That, of course, would be predicated on North Korea attacking first. But, of course, as we know, in past wars like the Vietnam War, governments have the ability to fabricate attacks like the Gulf of Tonkin. So China's left the door open for invasion. Basically, anybody, any government, including the U.S., could fabricate an attack and blame it on North Korea if they wanted to, or they could simply poke at North Korea until they do something stupid.
Interesting. So tell me, how do you envision what will happen in the near future for this?
As far as the war with North Korea?
Yes. I mean, what would be the pretext? How would Trump convince the American public that this is necessary?
Well, I don't think he necessarily plans to convince us that it's necessary with the executive powers of war given under George W. Bush. Any president can initiate war, I believe, for about 6 months without answering even to Congress. So I think what would happen is he'll initiate the war, and then he'll ask for forgiveness rather than permission later down the road, if he even asks for forgiveness. The issue here is, I think a lot of conservatives, tend to be, right now, a lot of us are skeptical in the U.S. of Trump, especially dealing with his cabinet decisions on filling the cabinet, all the globalist bankers he's surrounded himself with. We have a lot of questions and concerns, but when war arises, conservatives tend to rally around the government. It just seems to be their natural inclination. That's another worry of mine, that one of the goals here is to start a war and lure all the skeptical conservatives back into the fold. So we'll see what happens. I would guess that the left will become even more extreme and also enraged in their response to a war with North Korea, and that unfortunately a lot of conservatives will rally around Trump, creating even greater division in the U.S.
Now, Brandon, I want to ask you about who would profit from a war between the United States and North Korea. Is Trump getting duped by the Chinese and the Russians, and they can leverage this? How do you see the U.S. status in the global scene if they go out and do a war with North Korea?
Well, anyone who reads my blogs or reads my articles, or who has been reading my articles for maybe a year to 2 years, they're well aware of my position as far as who benefits. There is an organized faction of people who hold an ideology called globalism. Eventually they want to create a one world system. So one world currency, one world economy centralized under, perhaps the IMF or the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, and ultimately a one world government. This is what they openly call for. I can, provide mountains of evidence to support that assertion. These people exist. The ideology exists, and they remain in positions of power in major governments around the world. They also have influence over major governments around the world, including Russia and China. So the issue here is they need a chaos event or a crisis event in order to pressure various cultures, especially American culture, into accepting the idea of total centralization. Without a crisis event, it's just not going to happen, or it would take them way too long. I think they want to speed things up a little bit. They need a major crisis event. So North Korea would be an extension of that, or a part of that, in that if a war is initiated with North Korea, first of all, it provides a perfect cover for a crash of U.S. markets, which is going to happen inevitably anyway. The issue is the bankers do not want to get any blame for the crash of markets, so they need a distraction event in order to keep people focused on something else while the markets crash. Or people will simply blame, well, it was the war on North Korea, that's what caused the markets to implode. All attention moves away from the bankers. So that's one advantage to a war with North Korea. The other advantage is that with the U.S. already massively indebted, as it is, another war like North Korea, or like a war with North Korea, would basically sink the U.S. economy as far as debt is concerned. So the goal here is to sink the U.S., diminish the U.S. to second or possibly third world status, remove the dollar, the U.S. dollar as world reserve currency, create a crisis big enough that people beg for a new system. They beg for a solution from the elites. And of course, the elites will have their solution pre-made and handy for us, and that solution will be a global currency system, one world economic management under the IMF, and eventually one world government.
Okay, well, let's talk about how they are portraying President Trump in the mainstream media. What do you see as the mainstream media's agenda and goal with President Trump?
Well, I think it's hard to say with Trump. It's hard to say in terms of what Trump's position is, I should say. He's surrounded himself with globalist bankers at Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan. He's surrounded himself with neoconservatives, warmongers. So the question I'm really asking is President Trump aware of this agenda? Is he part of this agenda? It would seem, with his actions involving North Korea, that he may be a part of this agenda. The mainstream media, most of them, I think, are diehard leftists. They're not necessarily aware of any agenda. They work for the corporations that are aware of the agenda. So most of these journalists, they think Trump is the enemy. He's the bad guy. They're going to go after him as much as possible. One thing I've been noticing, though, is that recently the media has begun turning against the extreme left as far as groups like Antifa. So the media is starting to attack Antifa, and which I think also plays into this dynamic of, well, the left is going to be thrown to the wolves in the U.S. The left is going to be diminished. Conservatives are meant to become more totalitarian in our response to the left, more aggressive. Ultimately, what is happening here is the media is demonizing Trump as the bumbling villain who's going to destroy the economy. Conservatives are meant to take this aggression from the media as, well, we need to defend Trump, we need to rally around Trump. In the end, and I know this sounds complicated, in the end, conservatives, it's not enough for the globalists to get rid of conservative people or try to get rid of conservative people. Because when you take that kind of course, what all you end up doing usually is spreading the ideology instead of destroying the ideology. So what the globalists need to do is cause conservatives to become totalitarian, demonize themselves, become what the media is accusing us of being, fascists. They need us to demonize ourselves so that ultimately we abandon our own principles, and then conservatism dies an ultimate death, because really the target is conservative ideology, not conservatives or Trump. In my opinion, Trump is a Pied Piper. He's leading conservatives down the path of totalitarianism and the destruction of our own ideals.
Understood. Now, let's talk about the funding of the wall and the debt ceiling debate. What's the worst case scenario here?
Well, right. I think just today Trump rolled over, and as I expected and predicted, Trump rolled over and went along with the Democratic Party's 3-month extension of the debt ceiling. So now we're looking at a December debate instead of a debate this month as far as the debt ceiling goes, which is a complete 180 from what he was saying months ago when he said that he would veto any bill that didn't include funding for the wall. He would veto any bill that didn't include funding for the Harvey hurricane disaster. So I think that the debt ceiling debate is just a distraction. I don't think that they're ever going to freeze the debt ceiling. I don't think that there will be a government shutdown. I think that, honestly, I think they're extending it out until there is an incursion or a conflict with North Korea, because at that point, when a country's at war, there's no way that anyone is going to argue for a freeze of the debt ceiling.
Now, explain the concept behind group preparations on your website and the barter networks. I mean, most people have never heard of both of them, so if you can share with us what these are exactly.
Well, part of the solution that I suggest as far as economic crisis is concerned is the creation of alternative economies or alternative markets. What this is based on is basically a localization, or the concept of localization, using a local model, a local economic model where trade cycles within your neighborhood, and then within your town or city, within your county, within your state, and then beyond that. But the focus is redundancy within communities. So your community should be producing all the necessary items that community will need. You shouldn't have to have a really fragile freight system that travels across the country, or from Mexico into the U.S. or Canada into the U.S. in order to supply goods to your local community. You shouldn't need that. Your community should be producing its own goods and services. So it begins with that, with localization in a neighborhood or a town. And what I promote is that most people should, if they have the ability, start becoming producers. They need to start producing goods and services that are necessary, regardless of the state of the economy. Even if you're in a major crisis, if you're producing necessary items, then you're still viable in that local economy. You're still needed. Okay, so at that point, then you initiate barter networks. You have all these people producing goods locally, then you create a local barter network, and you trade amongst each other for goods and services. This system has, in to different varying degrees, has been created during every economic crisis in our modern era, from the Great Depression onward. Barter markets spring up everywhere. I believe during the Great Depression in the U.S., there was a 250,000 member barter network just in the state of California alone. So, and we saw this in Argentina during the 2001-2002 collapse. We've seen this in Greece. We're seeing it now, currently, in their economic crisis. Barter networks always spring up. These systems always create themselves naturally when there's an economic collapse. My suggestion is that people build these barter networks and localized systems now. They set them up now before the crisis hits its peak, so that you've already organized everything you need to organize. You don't need to be frantically establishing trade networks after the fact, after a crisis. You've set up a redundant system so that when there is a collapse in the mainstream economy, it doesn't affect you much because you've already built a backup economy.
Now, Brandon, you'd called Brexit, you'd called Trump victor in the elections. Do you see anything forming politically, any stories that people must be watching right now that can affect their livelihoods and just their life in general?
Well, I think my primary concern, and what I tell my readers to watch closely, has been North Korea. If we do go to war with North Korea, that would be a major signal for a market crash, stock market crash, perhaps a downturn in the U.S. dollar. Also, greater social unrest. So I see North Korea as a major catalyst. If it takes place, it would be a major catalyst for all of these, a breakdown in all of these systems, an implosion of a lot of economic bubbles that have been created over the past 8 years since the last economic crisis. So North Korea is my primary focus right now.
Brandon, please share with folks your website.
You can visit me at alt-market.com.
Brandon Smith, thank you very much for taking the time to do this interview with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining Brandon Smith and I today. I think it's very important to summarize this interview and touch on some of the things that we all must do right now with regards to our families and our finances, in order to prepare for a coming crash and to prepare our portfolios for the future. One thing I want to stress is that these kinds of things have happened before, and they are very often preceding tough economic times. So political and war times come after economic challenges, and we are in the eye of the storm when it comes to economic challenges. After 2008, we are rebounding, but the rebound is very weak, and the wealth distribution is very unequal. The elite, the 1%ers, even the 10%ers are feeling the recovery at full throttle, and the millennials or the young people of Europe and the United States are feeling it much less. People on fixed income and people that are not high earners do not see the trickle effect of all the QE money and this is causing a political divergence. And the political landscape today is very divided within the US, within Europe, and obviously in other countries as well. What you should do right now is focus on your main career. Make sure that your job is very secure, your business is very strong and healthy, and make sure that you provide excellent value to your employer or to your clients. I want to also stress that the next thing you should do is make sure that your portfolio is well balanced and ready for any sort of economic downturn that we might see. And I want you to take the following notes. Go to wealthresearchgroup.com/2017. This is my personal portfolio allocation for this year, and you can download it and check out how I diversify my own portfolio within asset classes. Regarding safe havens, I want you to go to wealthresearchgroup.com/safe havens so you can get an idea of some of the safe haven assets that are out there that the mainstream media obviously is not pushing because it's not in their agenda. Our newest special report is at wealthresearchgroup.com/crash, and that's my personal blueprint, my master plan for how to anticipate, prepare, execute, and then in the aftermath of the crash, what to do with your own finances. And if you still haven't checked out our cryptocurrency report, I urge you to do so, because cryptocurrencies are based on the blockchain, and the blockchain is going to be and is becoming the future of financial services. The opportunity is amazing, but you have to seize it. So go to wealthresearchgroup.com/crypto2017, and in the near future we will also have a beginner's guide, a beginner's video, and a microdoc on how to buy and store your own cryptocurrencies. But we also have a huge opportunity for people who do not want to own cryptocurrencies but want